You're winning. You're winning. You're winning. Hello, family, and welcome to another episode of Epic Understanding. I am delighted to have my guest tonight, and she is going to be a gift to us all. I'm going to tell you right now, she doesn't pull any punches. She says what she means, and she means what she says. But the the power behind her really comes from the fact of her wholeness, her complete self. But she does have the authority and the information to back up everything she has saying. I'm just going to pull this up for you. She is the author of Black and Blue. She is a retired LAPD sergeant. She is been widely acclaimed, and her voice has been featured on MSNBC, Fox News, CNN. Now this, the OWN Network, BBC, and many more. She is a police analyst. She is a mom. She is a woman. But more than that, she has the authority and faith of God within. Cheryl Dorsey, welcome to the program. I am honored, and it is a pleasure to have you.
I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I got to spend a little bit of time with you beforehand, and I asked you a question. It was a very simple question, but the way you answered it made me just want to unpeel the onion a little bit more. I asked you about the little girl inside of you, and did you still have her? And you said what? Answer that for us.
Well, I said I have the me who was me before I joined the LAPD. So that person
Mhm,
is still inside of me. That
mhm,
fighter, that go getter, that obstinate little girl, the one who, if you tell me no, then I must.
mhm,
That's still
mhm,
in me.
mhm, mhm. And you told me that you went to the LAPD because you were looking to thrive, not necessarily because you wanted to be a police officer. You wanted to thrive.
Yeah, I joined the LAPD for very selfish reasons. I was a young mom. I had just gone through a divorce. I had a young son. I was in a gang of debt because I like to shop.
Mm,
And
mhm.
I was working for the Department of Justice at the time. I was in the secretarial pool. I was a stenographer. So I
Oh,
worked
wow.
for these special agents and I would type up their reports. And
Mhm.
I saw the kind of work that they were doing. I knew the kind of money that they were making, and I'm looking at my paycheck every month, and I'm like, well,
Okay, okay,
something ain't right here. Uh, I had an opportunity to do a sting.
okay,
This was 1980. PCP was a big deal, and they
okay.
were looking. The Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement agents were looking to arrest a PCP dealer, young brother.
Okay.
And me being a black female there, one of the agents asked me if I would be a decoy to get this guy to come and meet me. And
Oh,
I was intrigued by it because I was young and it sounded like fun. And, so they said, just call him up and pretend to be a friend of a friend and tell him you're in town and you need a place to stay. Well, you already know, men being men. He hadn't seen
right.
me, didn't know me, but I just called him and said a thing. And I need a place to stay. And, can I stay with you? And he was like, is water wet?
Okay, okay.
So he met me at a restaurant, and there were mostly agents in there. And as soon as he sat down next to me, they just jumped on him and took him into custody. And I was like, is this what y'all do? And this is what they
Wow.
pay you to do? And so I'm like, I need to do your job. And so that was my mindset, was to eventually become a special agent for the Department of Justice. And I
Okay.
found out that I needed to be post certified here in California in order to be a special agent. And so what they explained to me was I need to get on some police department. Back then, I thought about the marshals, because we had marshals who used to sit in the courts. And I
Okay.
thought I could sit in the courts and listen to the courtroom testimony all day. And after a year, I'll get post certified and I'll go back to DOJ as a special agent. That was
Hmm.
my mindset. But I just began applying. I applied for the marshals, CHP, LASD, and LAPD. Well,
Hmm.
LAPD was under consent decree at that time to hire more women and more minorities. And so they had a very expedited hiring process. They put me through their process first. I got an
Okay.
academy date. I went to LAPD, and then, not really knowing what I was doing, I'm just thinking I'm going back to DOJ after 12 months.
Okay.
But once I got on LAPD and I started learning about the department, how big it was, and all of the special um, departments that they had within LAPD, that
Hmm.
I could go and work, I thought, well, shoot. But more importantly, the pay was good, medical and dental benefits. And at the end of 20 years of service, I could retire and get a pension for the rest of my life. And that was what sold me. I'm staying at LAPD for 20 years because I was very, very young and I could retire very, very young. And that's what I did.
Wow. And so you were not like, oh, so you were not that much different from anyone one else. And I just want to highlight this because I had to ask about affirmative action. Um, and you said they were under a decree, but it's not that you weren't able to do the job. It's just that in general, you're not the kind of person they look to hire.
Right, then and now. And it's not uncommon or unreasonable to think and understand this premise, because police departments only do really what they're made to do, right? We hear about consent decrees and oversight, and police departments being forced to treat black folks right.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
You have Department of Justice coming and looking over the shoulder of police departments, like they did in Ferguson, Missouri, and like they
Uh-huh.
did on the Baltimore Police Department, like they did in Minneapolis after the murder of George Floyd, to make them do what's right. And so
Hmm.
this is what was going on in 1980. LAPD
Hmm.
was forced to hire more women because there weren't enough of us on that department, and they were forced to hire more minorities. And so they know how to hire, they being LAPD and any other police department, they know how to get black folks on a police department when they're made to, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. I'm going to just go on record of saying this. You know, there's an idea that affirmative action means that you are being forced to hire Black people or women or what have you, and somehow doing that, you're not going to get the best person. In my mind, the real affirmative action is the good old boys network when you just hire Billy Joe because he's so and so's cousin. That's affirmative action to me. That's the original affirmative action. When you get people like yourself in the door, you actually get, from my perspective, a higher quality person because you are getting someone who has the wherewithal to go through all of that minutia when you're not welcome.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, all it does is level the playing field. It gives black folks an opportunity that otherwise, they would not give us. And it's not that we aren't qualified and capable. It's just that they don't think we're deserving of it, and so they
Hmm.
keep us out of these very special places where the special air is being inhaled until
Oh,
you
yeah.
make them, right?
Well, that's true. And I just want to highlight this. And because of that, you did your job very well, and you were afforded what so many other people were afforded, a pension and a career.
Yeah, I mean,
That
and let
is
me
true.
just say this before we get, deep into it, is because I really want to be part of what I do what I do is because I really want to be a recruitment tool. I've reached out to my
Hmm.
police chief here on LAPD, Mike Moore. We've had some conversations. I've said some pretty harsh things about what I think are his intentions in terms of
Mm.
not getting folks who look like me on the police department at this particular time. LAPD, and I get that the city demographics have changed, but there's 8 or 9% of the officers are Black on the LAPD right now. And I know that if LAPD really wanted to hire more Black folks or any other police department, they'd figure out how to do it. They've done it in the past. And so when I talk about the things that I talk about on television and the maltreatment that we see so many young men and women and children receiving from police departments, what I say is get on that police department. First of all, it's a
Hmm.
good paying job. Change is going to come from the outside, but certainly you need to be on that police department in order to affect real change. I believe if someone who looked like me and thought like me had been there when Derek Chauvin sat on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, it would have been a very different outcome. If someone
Well,
who
he
looked
probably
like
wouldn't have
me
sat on his neck for 9 minutes.
Exactly. If someone who looked like me and thinks like me had been outside of Tatiana Jefferson's home when Aaron Dean saw her playing a video game with her nephew and decided to shoot in the apartment, if I had been
Hmm.
his partner, I would have been like, dude, put the gun up. What the hell? What are you doing?
Hmm.
If you're not
Hmm.
there to stop that kind of foolishness, then it continues to occur.
Well, it takes bravery. And I just want to roll back to something that you shared with me. You said that you did not bleed blue, but quite frankly, I believe you do bleed blue. Matter of fact, I believe that you bleed red, white, and blue for the people of America. Somehow, there's a detachment of the people versus the authority in America. You are for the people because you wouldn't have George Floyd could have been um, white. He could have been Black. He could have been an old woman. He could have been anybody. And the person in you would have spoken up. It is not true to the spirit of peace officers to go against the rules and regulations. That is not the true spirit. This gang mentality, this you know, what is that? The Brotherhood. That's all made up. That's other than what they're actually supposed to be doing.
Well, it's not made up, and it's
Hmm.
certainly not what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, there is um,
Well,
a
they
kind
made it up. When I
written
say,
rule. You know what I mean?
well, that's
Uh,
what I mean. It's unwritten. It's not. There is no policy. It's a
no.
practice. So when I say it's made up, I mean that is not part of the real what it's created for. Is what I'm saying. Um, no one, no one, no authority is going to tell you that's what you're supposed to do in writing.
Right.
So even though that's a part of the culture, it's not a part of the creed. It's not a part of the true policy.
Well, I think it takes a certain kind of individual to do that job that I did
Hmm.
for 20 years.
Hmm.
And I think you certainly need to have a level of empathy and compassion
Hmm.
for people. When I say I didn't bleed blue, what I mean is that I didn't buy into their system. Um,
Right.
I took that job because I needed a good paying job. And at the
Hmm.
end of the day, when I went home, I was back to just being the mom of this little boy again.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't go along to get along. And I learned very early, in the police academy that it was probably going to be a difficult endeavor, but I had quit a job at
Hmm.
DOJ to do this
Okay.
job. And I was determined to see it incrementally to the end. First, 6 months in the police academy. I got to get through this. And then after I graduated, I knew I had to make it off probation so that I could then be vested and no longer at will. And once
Mm-hmm.
I became vested with 18 months under my belt now, it's
Okay.
very difficult to fire me. And I started to come into my own, if you will, in terms of um, who I was going to be going forward as a police officer. I understood when I joined, I was a Black woman. I've always been that first. I
Okay.
was a mother second. And
Okay.
then I was last and third, a police officer, and ultimately a police sergeant.
There you go. I want to give the family a little bit more about how you have been affecting policing. I'm going to play this. This is directly from your website. It's so powerful. Here we go.
Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey.
I, Los Angeles Police Sergeant
Author Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey.
Cheryl Dorsey, a retired LAPD sergeant. Always appreciate your input and your expertise as you served for a very long time.
Sergeant Dorsey, you speak with authority. I spent a long time as a police officer.
To give us an inside peek into police practices and tactics is retired Los Angeles Police Department Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey.
Cheryl Dorsey, she's a retired police sergeant, formerly with the LAPD, author of the book Black and Blue.
Cheryl Dorsey spent 20 years wearing an LAPD uniform. The retired sergeant is now a social justice advocate with a very unique view of policing.
See why this can be very complicated investigation.
Well, listen, it's very simple for me, and I'm both. I'm a citizen, I'm a Black woman, and I'm a mother.
You don't get to shoot and kill somebody because you can't catch them. Well, I was bothered by it, you know, as a Black woman first. I was certainly outraged as a supervisor because I know that this is not how we train our officers, and I knew that 𝐃𝐎𝐿 was minimizing and mitigating behavior. We heard on his body cam how he lied to the sergeant, heard from the police chief, a commander, a lieutenant, and the field sergeant all spoke to, this is not how we teach and train our officers. This was something that he improvised.
I'm not a bad guy, man. In the car. I'm not a bad guy.
When police officers put on black leather gloves, it's because they're about to put in work. When a cop puts hands on you like he did Mr. Floyd, you're going to go to jail, even though it may be a DA reject later.
Right to be super sensitive. We saw someone get shot in the back 8 times because he didn't have a tail light. Why tell a suspect to drop their gun, show you their hands, if you're going to shoot anyway?
Well, as a supervisor, someone who's reviewed uses of force in the past, what I hear is code speak from the prosecutor. Police officers are trained to know what they're shooting at. We have shoot, don't shoot scenarios all the time.
And when an officer kills you, then there's only one version, and that's the one that they tell.
The attorney general saying that it was justified. Now, they're giving their truth. I don't know that it's the truth. If you don't do anything to deter the bad behavior, then officers begin to understand seemingly that they can misbehave, they can commit violations of policy and in some instances law and be sheltered by their police departments. Everybody who wants to be the police should not be. There are so many officers on these police departments who are out there fearful, so they say, of Black folks, and are using deadly force as a first resort rather than a last resort. I've said all along that the police chief and those under him get no brownie points from me.
Why did it take 6 deaths on that department allegedly this year before they decided that they have a problem?
I think it's imperative for police departments to have routine and regular psychological reevaluations of their employees. When you see a red flag, when you see someone like 𝐃𝐎𝐿 who's got 18 personnel complaints, I think you need to pull him aside and have a fireside chat with him. We've seen them create an audio record that's contrary to what's really going on. We've seen officers say, quit fighting me, quit resisting, when there's no resistance going on.
Okay, I have to stop right there. I have to stop that one right there because that was so powerful for me. Create a audio record when that's not what's going on. Break that down for us.
Well, I mean, there's so many examples of that. Not too long ago, we saw in the fatal shooting of Daunte Wright, Kim Potter, the officer who shot and killed him. Why? Because he had an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. and
Mhm.
we heard her try to justify that deadly use of force, and then later feign, oh my bad, I thought I had my taser, when she looked down the barrel of her duty weapon after having
Mhm.
spent 20 years on that department, knowing the difference between a taser and her service revolver, yet say, taser, taser, taser. She's creating an
Okay.
audio record that
Mhm.
would
Mhm.
support her defense. I made a mistake. I thought it was my taser. There's no way you can convince me today that woman, after having spent 20 years as a training officer herself, that she thought she was looking down the barrel of a taser and not her duty weapon. And so police officers do that all the time. They say, oh, stop fighting, quit resisting, because they understand there may be a citizen within earshot who can't really see what's going on, but they hear
Mhm.
something. And if police investigators come by later and they start talking to witnesses, did you hear anything? Do you know what was going on? Did you hear the officer say anything? They create an audio record for witnesses, for the 911 tapes that we sometimes get to hear. They manufacture a reason to justify unnecessary use of deadly force over and
Mhm.
over and over again.
You know what? Where does that come from? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I've definitely seen it happen with Black people, but I've also seen it happen with, you know, people who were just extremely vulnerable. I do not remember this older woman's name, but she was a white female. She was moving towards her 80s. She was obviously frail. She was. Had a diminished capacity, and she was wandering the street. She had went into the store, and the store clerk said that she had taken something. The police officers broke her arm, brutalized her, threw her in the threw her in the cell, and they are seen on tape actually laughing about that, laughing about this as they sit at their desk. And so that is just heartbreaking. This was a white woman, and they are just collectively enjoying, her misery.
Well, we certainly see more examples of that happening with people who look like me, but it,
Hmm.
it, it happens to it can happen
Yeah.
to anybody. It can happen to anybody, and I often say I can literally take race out of the equation. It's officers in my mind who are drunk with power, and the
Yeah.
officer can be of any ethnicity as well. Officers learn, they don't start off being abusive and aggressive. They start off, we have a term on LAPD, 415. That means you're kind of out of control, 415 mouth. You start off talking
Mhm.
snappy to people, a little disrespectful. Uh,
Okay.
Officers, white officers, and there have been studies, particularly on the Oakland Police Department, about how
Mm.
officers speak when they stop white folks and how officers speak when they stop Black folks. Their
Okay.
tone is different, the verbiage is different. And so when
Okay.
officers do these things that are tantamount to police misconduct and nothing happens, you look left, you look right, and you're like, oh shit, nothing happened.
Okay.
Start to
Okay.
push the envelope, and you see how far you can go and get away with certain things, and then it just becomes second nature, and we get to a point where we see officers just easily knock somebody in the head, smash their head in the concrete, cuff them
Yeah.
up, and then
Yeah.
lie about, well, he was resisting when the person was doing none of that. But they
Mhm.
understand that at the end of the day, police chiefs who are very savvy will get in front of a bank of cameras, and they will protect that organism, that entity, that department, because they know civil liability is likely. And sometimes in protecting that department, officers get the benefit of the protection as well. And so it
I
just becomes a replicating thing.
I love the way you put that. They will protect that organism at all costs. It's not even just that person, but it's the whole organism, the mentality, the group, the process of it all. Absolutely. Okay. I want to get back to the video, but I had to I had to talk about that like right then and there.
Alex Villanueva is well aware of the 17 internal
Uh-oh.
gangs
Hold on.
deputies
I got to
formed.
check my sound. I'm my own engineer. Here we go.
Who get tattoos
There
and
we
have
go.
celebratory barbecues when they use force on Black and brown folks, when they kill folks. And he refuses to address that.
Alex Villanueva, the sheriff, also said that I'm not going to conduct an inquisition. I'm not really interested in finding out who these alleged gang members are within my
Uh-oh.
ranks.
Gotta freeze it. I'm sorry. I gotta freeze it. I gotta freeze it. I gotta talk about these gangs and these gang signs here. These are all tattoos and gang signs that are associated with police departments and police gangs.
Specifically the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And, you know, we just had an election here, and the sheriff, Alex Villanueva, was just voted out and replaced by Robert Luna, who came from Long Beach Police Department. So he is the new sheriff here. And these symbols that you're showing right now are the symbols that are associated with the 17 internal gangs within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. They call themselves things like the executioners, the Vikings, the banditos, and these internal gangs have existed for decades within the Sheriff's Department. And these images actually come from blotters on police desks, mouse. You can see a mouse for a computer, a mouse pad. These are the tattoos that these deputies get purportedly on their body. I've heard that they get them on their legs and other places where they can be concealed. And so what I was saying in that particular clip that aired on Spectrum News was, I'd like somebody to have Sheriff Alex Villanueva pull up his pants legs so I can see who he is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is what I don't understand. This is honest, because when you said that, I thought to myself, now these people go for a physical every year, right? Am I wrong?
No, I don't know that they do that. I mean, we used to on LAPD. I don't know what the Sheriff's Department does, but I mean, you could look at some of these folks and tell they haven't seen a doctor in quite some time just on their physical appearance. But yeah, no. So I mean, nobody is regulating that. But you know, it was disingenuous for Alex Villanueva to pretend like he didn't believe that this was a thing. I mean, there's a undersheriff, Paul Tanaka, who's in federal prison right now. He was the undersheriff to Lee Baca, who was the sheriff before Villanueva. And Paul Tanaka was an admitted executioner. He came from the Linwood Sheriff's Station. And so they know that these people exist. And Alex Villanueva grew up on the Sheriff's Department, so he knows exactly who's who in the zoo. And that's why he said, I'm not holding no inquisition to find out, but I've already prohibited the clicks, is what he called them. And, it's a thing of the past, is what he was pretending. We know that not to be true based on what we see.
So these are LAPD gangs.
LASD, LA Sheriff's Department.
Oh, LASD.
LA County.
Okay. But would you say that there are similar gangs like this across the nation, or would you say this is isolated to LA?
I can't speak to how organized they seem to be on the Sheriff's Department. I mean, they are something that I've never seen before in terms of how high up they go within the command staff structure of that agency, how outward they are with these tattoos. I mean, it's been reported that they go and have parties where they get inked at the end of a police beating. And so this is something that's been widely reported and being investigated, even as we speak within the sheriff's department. I've not heard that kind of foolishness on other agencies. Now, I have heard of other police departments doing things like there was a Texas sheriff also
Mhm.
who was rewarding his officers with dinner cards for restaurants when they were involved in unnecessary uses of force.
Okay.
How do you do that and get away with it? It's mind-boggling to me. So there are varying degrees of this kind of foolishness that occurs, I'm sure, across these 18,000 police departments. But I can speak with some specificity about LASD, LA County Sheriff's Department, because it's been so widely reported in the papers here.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I have this is just blowing me away. And I'm just going to say readily, um, this isn't the first time that I've heard this, but this are the first time that I've seen so many of the symbols at once. I actually have Dr. Candace Matthews here. She is very big on the political scene in Texas. Um, and she has a question. I let the community know, the Epic Understanding community know that you were going to be here, and so they are coming with their questions. And then I have Dr. Dr. Raheem Lay here also, and he has a question for you. I'll go ahead and bring everyone up. Hello.
Hi, hello.
Oh, good
Can you
evening.
hear me?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Awesome. Wait, I'm hearing some kind of echo. Dr. Lay, let me see if it's you. No, it's you, Candace. It's you, Dr. Matthews. Okay, Dr. Lay, go ahead and ask your question first. I just want to say Dr. Lay has actually created a program to help police officers with empathy, and he is currently active duty in the Air Force as well. Go ahead and ask your question, dear sir.
Sergeant Dorsey, nice to meet you.
Speak up, speak up. Can't hear you.
Can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
You can? Okay. So, how's it going, Sergeant Dorsey? I've been doing for a couple of years, working with police officers on professional empathy, building a certification program for all police academy cadets. I was specifically interested in personality traits of police officers, what drives an individual to go into policing. And one of the things that kept coming up as far as when we look at racism and we look at personality trait of narcissism, that they go hand in hand. Like you see the lack of empathy, you see the sense of entitlement. And you mentioned something in reference to I think you said a Texas sheriff buying meal cards or restaurant cards and things, rewarding bad behavior basically. And how do they get away with something like that? And that really sparked that sense of entitlement and lack of accountability. In your experience in working on a police force, what drove you to becoming a police officer? And I'm sorry, I don't know how many years you were on a police force, but
20.
20. Okay, so
Mhm.
what drove you to becoming a police officer exactly?
So for me, it was probably very different than maybe what others, I didn't come on thinking I was going to make a difference in the community. I wouldn't try to do all of that. I was going through, I had just gone through a divorce, had a lot of debt, a young son, and I needed a good paying job. I needed to be able to create a lifestyle for my son that was very similar to the one that my parents had done for me. And so I was singularly motivated by providing for my son.
And the other question I had there was, and there was a question that I wanted to ask that I was asking even in my research is that with the behaviors that you see happening on a police force, do you believe in your experience that these individuals came into the police force with that type of behavior, if you will, or did the force in and of itself, by being in that force, it created that type of behavior?
It's hard for me to say, but what I will say is this. There's the boys in school who used to always get their butt kicked, and so they all of a sudden become somebody and join a police department, and now they get to be the abuser because they really didn't have the ability in their mind to get at these folks who were beating them up. So now they got a gun. Now, there's, and I don't want to, male bash, but I think women, we're just set up differently for sure. And so I think that, there are some men on police departments who maybe they don't have a lot of say in the house. Maybe their women run their household. And so when they come to work, they get a little bit taller, voice gets a little deeper, and that job defines them. And I also believe without a doubt that you can be influenced by partners. And I think that you can come on for all of the right reasons and be a really good person, and you be exposed to things, partners who might get you a little twisted. And that's why I encourage police departments, although they don't do it, but I think every police department should have a psychological reevaluation of their officers, particularly patrol officers. I'm just going to say every 2 years, because you are exposed to things. We suffer from trauma. We see, we go from one radio call to another where we see things that can really affect us. And it's not sexy for police officers to self-report. They won't. Right. So no one really knows that we're having a hard time dealing unless and until something happens that gets national attention. And then you find out, like a Derek Chauvin, this guy's got 27 personnel complaints. How did that happen?
Yeah.
So this person has been involved in domestic violence at home. Yep. How does that happen? Because they've got some things that they're not able to deal with and process. And so they get home and get aggressive with the wife. Suicide rates are high amongst police officers. You don't hear a lot about that. Why? Because it's not sexy to report.
It's not sexy.
Alcoholism is high among police officers. And so these are all contributing factors, I believe, to things that we see. And I'll just say this real quick. I had a radio call one time when I was a sergeant. It was a young man who ultimately jumped off of a roof of a building. And he didn't die, at least not right away. We had spent a long time talking to this guy, trying to get him to come down. And it was a young Black kid, and he was about the age of my son at the time, and it messed me up. And when I got back to the station, I went to my lieutenant and I said, listen, I'm bothered by this. I need to talk to somebody. Can you have some psychologists from BSS come and be here, so as the officers come back, they can talk to someone if they want to. And I let my officers know that these people were going to be available. And all of the men said, nah, Sarge, I'm good. I don't need to talk to nobody. I was the only one who raised my hand and said, what room do I find these people in?
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is what the other
wow.
thing that's so interesting.
Dr. Lay, I'm going to have to, I want to give Dr. Matthews a opportunity. She is the vice chair of the TCBD in Texas. She is a powerhouse all on her own. I can just say, whoa and wow. When she speaks, you'll see what I mean. Dr. Matthews, please take yourself off mute.
Good evening. Okay, so basically I wear several hats. We deal with a lot of policing that's dealing with a lot of injustices, because what we actually believe is in community policing, okay? However, what is happening is that we have white supremacists that's hiding behind a badge. This is why you have ignorance in authority. When you have ignorance in authority, this is what basically is the fabric, the infrastructure of what happened to George Floyd, or what happened here in Texas. We see it all the time. And they are protected by police unions. And so in order to combat this approach, we have to hold the police unions accountable, because accountability breeds responsibility. And it's our responsibility to ensure that accountability is being done across the board, and that's not what's happening. Then you have legislation that's not being done properly either, because there should have been a George Floyd Policing Act in place where you see something, you say something. But see, this is what happens when you have white fear, which is the infrastructure of white supremacy. So how did you deal with that in the police force?
Well, let me say this about that, because we know that white supremacists have infiltrated these police departments. There have been reports by the FBI that speak to this, and so this is not anything that's not known. And when you have politicians on the federal level or police chiefs on the local level who clutch their pearls and act like they're surprised when they see these officers acting out, or when they find out that some of the people on January 6th were actually on duty or retired law enforcement officers, when they pretend to not know that this is a thing, they're being intellectually dishonest. And while police unions certainly have a role to play, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the police chief. Every police chief was once a police officer. Every sheriff is an elected official. And while they talk a good game in front of a bank of cameras about doing something that's going to be substantive in terms of accountability, it never happens. And while there was much said about the George Floyd Justice and Reform Act, I personally have a lot of angst about that, because had it passed, and I knew that it wouldn't, but had it passed, it would have done nothing to stop Derek Chauvin, to stop a killing of Breonna Taylor, all of this talk about no-knock warrants being ended on the federal level. Well, that's great, but federal agents don't serve no-knock warrants. Local narcotics officers, patrol officers are the ones who serve no-knock warrants. And so they've done nothing to stop local law enforcement from serving no-knock warrants. Police officers have always had a duty to report. When you see misconduct being committed in your presence, when you acquiesce, when you don't report, you now are committing police misconduct. And so all of this double talk and what I call code speak that they say to civilians to make you guys think that they really are about to do something is just that. It's double speak.
So I just want to highlight this. When you say it boils down to the chief, their hands are not tied ever by the police unions?
Police chiefs have total autonomy over their police departments, much like a sheriff, much like a police commissioner. That is their fiefdom. They run it. Even when you have an independent civilian review board, and I think those are important to have, I think it's necessary, but I'll use LAPD as an example. We have an independent civilian review board. It's called the Police Commission. And when our police commission looks over the shoulder of our police chief, as they did in the fatal shooting of a young man here by the name of Ezell Ford, who was shot and killed by LAPD gang members. And our police commission at that time found fault with the officers who used deadly force. And they wrote a report. It's a recommendation, much like what you hear with the Office of Inspector General. When they write a report, it's a recommendation. And when it gets to the police chief, they can say, I appreciate that recommendation, but I'm going to do nothing.
Okay.
And that's it.
Wow.
And so then the pressure has to come from the community, because now you've got an errant police chief who serves at the pleasure of an elected mayor or city manager, some elected official, or you have an errant sheriff who is an elected official. And that's when the onus then becomes on the community to now get involved and get engaged and really hold that person accountable if he's not going to hold his officers accountable.
Okay. We have another caller. She wants to ask a question. Go ahead, Sandra. Oh, she's not
So
ready.
if
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
so, so if the police chief has the ability to make the decision to do something or not, and he doesn't, and that is an well, he's not an elected official. They're usually like here in Atlanta. I'm in Atlanta. So the police chief is put in place by the mayor. So therefore, as a citizen, are you saying that it's our, I guess, our position that we can then force the mayor to force that police chief's hand? Because I think a lot of times we are misled by a lot of things. Uh, we do the big government thing, when it's time to vote for the president or when it's time to do a lot of things that's on the federal level, we go and vote for it. We make a big deal out of it. But it's when it's on our local levels that we don't. And I think that's an issue. So, how would you suggest if we wanted to, what would be the way we would need to go about it?
That's exactly what you would have to do. And it's going to be a long, involved process. I don't want to pretend that this is going to be easy to do because,
Right.
mayors are only elected, I don't know what, every 4 years, 2 years. I don't know. We just
Hmm.
had a mayoral race here in Los Angeles, and we have a Black woman for the first time here as the mayor over the city of Los Angeles. But certainly, when you understand that the police chief is the one who determines when you have a Derek Chauvin whether or not that officer is going to be allowed to stay on the police department after he's acquired 27 personnel complaints. How
Hmm.
is that possible? How does that happen? And even in the case of Derek Chauvin, when we had, you know, Arredondo Madeira, the police chief over there, who, kind of looked like me, but he wasn't a black man, but I mean, he had dark skin. Um, he knew who Derek Chauvin was. He grew up on that department. He actually sued that department as a police officer or a sergeant before he became the police chief. And you'll hear police chiefs say, well, the unions are powerful. You can't just fire a police officer. It's not easy to do. But I want people to understand that working in a black and white is not a right. And if
Okay.
you have a Derek Chauvin, if you have someone who's been involved in numerous personnel complaints where there's smoke, there's fire. If the Internal Affairs Division hasn't been able to substantiate a reason to discipline this officer or recommend discipline for the police, get a paper penalty. Do I suspend them for days without pay, or do I give them a training assignment to retrain them, or do I fire them? That's the police chief. And so when you have someone who doesn't seem to have the temperament to be in a black and white, driving around and interacting with the community, while it may be difficult to fire them, you could certainly take them out of the field. A police chief, a captain
Okay.
can do that. Take them out of the field, put them on the desk. I've seen it happen for lesser offenses. I know that it can happen. And when it doesn't happen, then that officer lives to offend again. And it's not until it makes national news and when we've lost a life that now again they're clutching their pearls and they're like, oh my God, had no idea that Derek Chauvin was a crazy man, allegedly.
Hmm. Hmm. That is a very good thought. I had Police Chief William Blair on here. Actually, he's been on here several times, and we had a whole program about the police unions and the unions being the issue. However, I wish he was here today because I would I would like him to talk about managing that person and their dysfunction beyond the police unions, because you just gave several examples of what a police chief could do when they realize that they have someone that is dangerous. Go ahead, Dr. Matthews.
But see, then you have to look at this as well. When you have police chiefs or sheriffs that do not hold their people accountable. This is what happens when you recycle dirty cops. So when you recycle dirty cops, you're going to get the same type of behavior. You see what I'm saying? So like here in Houston, we've done several things across this state, holding police officers accountable from police brutality. I've even done stuff across the nation. And for one instance, we had a situation with the Houston Police Department with a young man by the name of Jalen Randall, which we made national news with that. And what ended up happening, the young man had a warrant, and they made it their business to go in the neighborhood to go get him. And before the guy can even answer the command, he shot the young man and killed him on sight. So now it's at the point where, so this was the same guy who literally beat up another person to a pulp, and then he ended up getting off for that same specific case. So now you just recycled another dirty cop who now has killed another African American. And see, what happens is that they bring these white supremacists that hide behind a badge and come and police in our neighborhoods. We need community policing. You understand what I'm saying? And that's not what's happening. And then when you have these police unions that pretty much want to cover up and move on type mentality, and you're not holding them accountable to the fire, then that's going to be part of the issue as well. Now, when you're dealing with the sheriffs, we can definitely hold them to the fire because they are elected officials, which means we put you there, you work for us. But when you're dealing with the chief of police, that means we have to deal with the mayor and let that mayor know we put you in place, which means you don't put a muzzle on this guy, then we're going to roll you up out of office. So basically, it's a trickle effect, and it's going to take every aspect for all of us to work together to combat what is actually happening.
So it's definitely multifaceted. And one of the things that absolutely needs to be the focus for community is qualified immunity, because qualified immunity is what gives officers the shelter and the protection when they engage in something that ends up in a deadly use of force or some sort of physical assault. And if qualified immunity is not ended, and that's going to take on the national level, federal legislation, and we've already heard Tim Scott and the GOP say that's a non-starter for discussion. Any conversation that doesn't begin with qualified immunity is a waste of time. But what you can do is you can talk to your local legislators about decertifying police officers who engage in certain types of behaviors. And just like someone who doesn't have a license can't drive a car, if you don't have your certification, here in California, it's POST, Peace Officers Standards and Training. If you don't have that POST certification, you can't be a police officer. And that is something that's doable on the local level.
Hold on one second. I want to get Dr. Lay in here. Dr. Lay?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. All right. So, I mean, so much information here that's being said. And I think when you talked about what we can do as far as taking them off the patrol, putting them at the desk, right? It really flashbacks for me as far as being in the military. I'm in the military. I've been in the military for nearly 20 years, but as a mental health provider now, but previously I was an infantryman. Right. And one of the things I noticed that even when we deployed, you know, we dealt with traumatic events and things of that nature, things that you've even spoken about as police officers, deal with seeing things that typically most people don't see on a daily basis, but you all do. And so you deal with trauma as well. But when we come back from deployment, we do have a dwell time. You know, and that dwell time is like a year. Sometimes it'll be 2 years, you know, before you're up again for rotation. But when it comes to police officers, with the trauma that you all deal with day to day, there's no dwell time. And when you mention the desk thing, going to the desk and being at the desk for 2 years or 3 years. My question then is, I often hear that police are very undermanned. All right. They don't have the staffing. They don't have enough police officers to even put a dwell time or something like that in play. Is that one of the reasons why we don't see that type of intervention happening anytime it's dealing with situations like we're talking about today, is because they don't have enough people to even do patrols?
Certainly resources are a problem, but I mean, police need to be proactive in that area. If you understand that you need X number of officers, then you need to do some hiring. And you can't legitimately say that there aren't qualified people out there for you to locate and get on those departments. I mean, listen, it was common knowledge on LAPD. I mean, they were hiring folks by the dozens because of a consent decree. And that's the only thing that gets, police chiefs' attention, is when they are made to do something. They'll do it as long as that consent decree is in effect. And then once it runs its course, then they go back to business as usual. And so certainly that could be an excuse, but not really. And you're not going to get an officer and take him out of the field, for a year and put him on the desk. That usually happens, when somebody, I mean, it happens regularly. Somebody comes to work and they don't like the person whose name is on the board. And they're like to the watch commander, I'm not working with her. I'm not working with her. Put her on the desk and give me Johnson, her being me. Or, so there's no appetite to do the right thing. And it saddens me that these police chiefs don't have an appetite to do better, because they know better. And so that's why it's so important for the community to have these conversations and educate themselves. Everybody tell somebody about these possibilities, so that when you sit before a police chief, you can ask them, okay, well, I get you can't fire Derek Chauvin, but working in a patrol car is not a right. Put him on the desk. Listen, I have been put on the desk personally, so I know it's possible. For reasons that were far less than me putting hands on somebody. I came to work one day back in the day. You ladies might understand and appreciate this. I had a blue cellophane in my hair. Okay. And I came to work with this blue cellophane, and my sergeant looked at me, and when I walked into the roll call room, he hollered from the front of the room when he saw me, "Holy shit." That was his response to me coming to work with a blue cellophane. And guess what? He took me immediately out of the field. And when I asked him, how come I'm not working with my partner? He said, you're not going out in the field with that mess in your hair. I'm not putting you out. I'm not putting you out with that mess in your hair.
Just like that.
Just like that. And we have a term on LAPD, we call them house mouse. These are the guys, the kind of misfit soldiers, if you will, that nobody want to work with because they problematic for one reason or another. And so the watch commander on that particular day will put that person in the kit room. So now your job tonight, Johnny, is to pass out the car keys and the shotguns and the tasers, the flares. You're not going to work the field tonight because don't nobody want to work with you, right? You can get a jacket where they just don't want to work with you. And now you tied to the station. So they can do it so easily, but they won't. Why? Well, because nobody's making them. Nobody's telling them that we know you guys can do this. We know you could have gotten Derek Chauvin out of the field with 27 personnel complaints. If you can't sustain them, we got to wait till he actually kills someone.
Thank you for breaking that down. Thank you for breaking that down for us. And I just want to highlight something for the group in case, they missed it. I don't want anybody in the audience to miss this. There is a lack of desire to hire women and people who have an interest in being on the police, in the police department, Black and brown people and women. But at the same time, there's this communication that we're undermanned. Okay, that that we don't have enough people. So obviously those two are not the same. Those things don't mesh. So if you hire more people who are interested in being part of your police department, you will not have a hiring problem. And then you will be able to easily put somebody on desk duty who is not doing their job properly. And I just had to highlight that because we said it so fast. You could have missed it, and I don't want anybody to miss that solution in case anybody's looking for one. Dr. Matthews, you had a question.
Let me just say this real quick. In terms of hiring, because police departments, my chief too, pretends like I can't find no Black folks that want to do the job. Have you been to the HBCUs? Have you talked to these young people who are taking criminal justice classes, who have an interest in law enforcement? Not everybody is doing social justice courses because they want to be an attorney. We have young Black men who are put in the system erroneously, and they decide, you know what, I'm going to go back to school and be an attorney and represent folks who look like me who are wrongly accused. I know that there's a segment of society out there who look like me, who have been stopped and profiled by the police and would be a prime candidate to be a police officer. But these police departments don't have an appetite because nobody is making them have an appetite to find qualified candidates who look like me.
All right. Dr. Matthews, you were up next. Work on your speaker for me, though, but go ahead and ask your question because you had something to say.
Well, the main thing is in order to, like I said, to combat these white supremacists that's hiding behind the badge, we have to have, it starts with your local elections. Local elections matter. It starts local to your county, all the way to your federal level. Because, again, when you're dealing with white fear is perpetuated by white supremacy. So therefore, in order to combat this, we all have to work together. Even the white people who don't have issue with racism have to call it out. Which means if you have a partner that's working with you, that's doing some systemic racism activity, you got to call it out. And so that's where the police unions will need to come in, to where they have to be also the ones to call this stuff out as well. It's going to take all of this stuff in order for this to work. Because if not, it's going to be the same thing over and over and over. And we have to have change.
Well, let me say this about the police unions. If you're waiting on them to do the right thing, you'll be waiting a long time. So I would direct that energy somewhere else where it's more likely to have a real substantive effect. We know that there are white supremacists and neo-Nazis on these police departments, all 18,000 of them. So why don't we have a conversation about how do we get them off? Let's start with that. Because they don't have the temperament or the skill set. Clearly, they've demonstrated that they should not be on a police department. When you've got a sheriff passing out cards to go to a local restaurant for dinner after you've abused somebody, you can only assume that, that fish rots from the head. And there are many others much like him on that police department. And so you got to get them off. You got to get folks who have the skill set and the temperament to be a police officer. Not everyone who wants to be should be. And then once you get these people, you need to train them properly. And I'm not saying that any of what we see nationally is a training issue. I'm not buying that because I know better. But you certainly understand that training is perishable. Psychological evaluations are imperative to have to make sure that these people are in a good headspace. And when you crack open an officer's head and it's not working right, then there should be no shame in any police captain, police chief's game in terms of saying, I need you out the field. I can't get you off my roll, but I need you out the field.
Okay. When you look at that, though, and it's funny that you say that because it doesn't target white supremacy. It don't target it. It may target the psychological piece of it, but it doesn't target white supremacy. Because, again, you have some of these suckers that go through here and take all of these psychological tests when they are in the trying to come into the actual police force, and they still have these white supremacist ideologies, and they can actually pass a psychological test. So again, in order to flush this type of ideology out of policing, it is called accountability, and laying the accountability where it belongs.
Cheryl?
I agree. I agree. Accountability is key. I mean, if you don't do anything to deter bad behavior, then why would anybody do anything differently? They won't. And so when we find an officer who has a certain proclivity, if you can't get them out of the field, if you can't get them off the force, get them out of the field. If they are racking up personnel complaints, clearly there's a problem. Where there's smoke, there's fire, and you need to get to the root of that problem. And police chiefs don't seem to want to do that wholesale, in my mind.
Okay. Sandra's been waiting patiently backstage. Sandra, go ahead with your question.
I guess I'm not understanding a couple of things. We say we want to get them out the field and we want to put them on the desk. But what is that going to do? Because the ideology doesn't change. They're just on a desk. And at some point, more than likely, they're going to go back to the field. So we're still going to have that same problem. And I can't understand how it is that I can commit a crime or I can do something so bad in one state or in one city, and yet I can move to another city and get put right back on a force and start doing the same thing all over again. And until I do something there to the extent that is brought out to the to the public rather, then all of that, those priors come into play. But we're still not doing anything because he'll get left from there, let go from there possibly, and now we'll just move on. So it's like we're still recycling. So I don't understand what putting them on a desk is going to do, because it's only for a moment. They're going to go right back out into the field and they're going to do the same thing all over again.
Well, part of why I propose taking someone out of the field is because I'm presuming that they've been engaged in misconduct. And while, officers get assigned to home, how we hear on TV, the officer's been relieved of duty. That only happens for 30 days. With pay, everybody gets mad about that whole with pay thing because of the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, because of qualified immunity and all of that stuff that protects police officers. And so I'm saying get them out of the field in the immediate, conduct your internal administrative investigation. If it's going to be something criminal, the whole DA elected prosecutor situation is something else that can be discussed at another time. But getting them out of the field will do one thing immediately, which is no longer expose the community to this particular person in terms of them moving from one department to another. Absolutely, that happens. We saw that with the case of Timothy Loman, the officer who shot and killed Tamir Rice. He had just come from another police department where he was shown the door because he frightened the deputy chief, according to this police chief. He said, "This guy scares me." And so they allowed him to resign. He gets the gift of resignation. You don't know why an officer resigns, right?
Right.
They move on to another police department, much like Betty Shelby, who shot and killed Terrence Crutcher. He's walking down the highway with his hands in the air, and she said, "Oh, he scared me more than anything I've ever seen in my entire life." And she shoots and kills this man. She resigns, and then she moves to another police department. And I believe she continues to teach a course, an accredited course over there in Oklahoma. She calls it dealing with a critical incident. I call it how to get away with murder. So the way you get around that, Sandra, is you decertify these police officers so they can't move from department to department. We have a senator here in California who's working on legislation right now to decertify police officers who engage in certain activities so that they cannot move from one agency to another. You cannot be a police officer if you aren't certified to be a police officer.
I want to address two areas with you. How can we hold police chiefs accountable when they allow someone to have 27 incidents and they still have them active? And then how can we hold police unions accountable when they fight for someone who is full of foolishness um, to be back on the field? I'm curious.
Well, you're not going to be able to hold police unions accountable. You can't compel a police union to do anything. They're there for one particular reason. They're a lobbying arm for the most part of a police department, and so they are there to work to benefit police officers. So you're not going to be able to control and corral them. As far as a police chief, every police chief serves at the pleasure of an elected official. And so while town halls are important and pressure from the community to have this police chief come in and have a conversation with you, the community, about quality of life issues, just like you would if there was a burglary situation or if there was a serial rapist, you'd call the police chief and say, hey, what are you doing over here in my community about this problem? How do we fix this? Same thing. You hold them accountable. You hold their feet to the fire. You ask the tough questions and you require real substantive answers. And if that police chief continues to act and move in that same vein, then you just go right up the ladder to who? The elected official at the pleasure of whom he serves.
Okay. Okay. That sounds good. That sounds good. All right. Everybody, I'll give you one last question as we round things up. Dr. Matthews, do you have one that's already on your brain?
It's more of a comment because she's from California, Sergeant Dorsey. And so our former police chief came from California. Okay, and he was over there with some sexual harassment, foolishness, everything that was going on Art Ostaveta. I ran his ass out of Houston, okay, because one, when he left from California, he ended up going to Austin. And when he went to Austin, he caused a lot of foolishness in Austin. And then when he came to Houston, I was more or less like, why are y'all bringing this man here? This man is problematic. This man was problematic in California. He's problematic in Austin. We had video to verify all of this, him being problematic. And then you come to Houston, we had a Hardy Street raid that is still going on right now where he probably get drugged back from. And then when we ran him out of Houston, he ended up going to Miami and didn't last 6 months. So it's like, again, if the track record is there, why are you still recycling these problematic officers?
Because the community allows it. The community allows it. You guys hold town halls and hearings to hear these police chiefs tell you what amazing things they're going to do for you. And then they get in those positions and they do just the opposite. And so just like police officers move around, police chiefs do the same thing. They get so accustomed to feeding at the trough. They enjoy that special air that they breathe as police chiefs, and they too are drunk with power. And oftentimes the fish rots from the head. The corruption, the institutionalized racism starts from the very tip top. And I'm talking about police chiefs. So communities need to do their homework when these folks come to your town saying, I want to be your police chief. You need to know who they were and what was that track record. And why were you only over there for 6 months? Because if you left a job after 6 months and now you want to come here, what was going on that you're running from? It's incumbent upon us as Black folks to get involved and get engaged. We got to roll up our sleeves and do the tough work.
Wow. Get involved and get engaged. And obviously, you've given us the thought process of find out who they report to, and walk that walk and get connected with that. Is there anything else that we need to be doing?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to do, but I mean, baby steps, right? And so get on these police departments. You need to vote when you have an opportunity to. I hear so many people say, oh, my vote doesn't matter. And we know that not to be true because I've seen in these midterm elections, folks have won by what? 1 vote? 2 votes, 100 votes. So absolutely your vote counts. You need to get on juries when you get a summons to be a part of a jury, because you need to be in that box when you have a Derek Chauvin or when you have a Kim Potter. You want to have some say about whether or not that officer is going to be acquitted for shooting somebody with a gun when they thought it was a taser. You need to be on that jury. Get involved and get engaged at every level.
That's such an excellent point. If you can't do anything else but register to vote so that you can be a part of the jury pool, that is the very least that you can do so you can help make the decision on whether you believe if someone is innocent or guilty. That's very good. I love that one. Dr. Lay.
Sergeant Dorsey, thank you so much for for speaking out and your work, your body of work, and I look forward to reading your book. Definitely, I as a mental health provider, I do follow and study human behavior very much. One thing I did get into lately is studying systems, and when I look at the police, the history of policing, and I mean dating back all the way to slave patrols, I'm not seeing anywhere in history where that system was designed to do what you you envision a police officer should be, right? And my question for you is when it comes to prevention, or when it comes to how we hire, the hiring process. We mentioned psychological testing, which they do use the MMPI to do psychological evaluation. I um, I argue to bring in the NPI, which is a narcissistic personality inventory, not to diagnose narcissism, but to see if there are traits pertaining to narcissism, as far as lack of empathy, sense of entitlement. If an academy individual will score high in that level, then they go through my empathy certification course, right? So that when they do graduate, they can't say they didn't know how to apply human, soft skills or whatever have you to their work or anything like that. But where do you stand as far as prevention services or prevention training for individuals like academy, like anyone that's interested in becoming a police officer? um how uh, how much knowledge, or what have you seen done from a prevention standpoint before they even earn a badge?
It's hard for me to speak on that. There's 18,000 police departments. And when you think about a police department, most people think large agencies, but here's an example of one that was a police department consisting of 6. And I'm talking about Uvalde, right? This was a 6-member police department, and that included the police chief. So when they disbanded that police department, they just got rid of 6 people. So it's very difficult to one time diagnose someone, test them, and think that you're going to get a cure-all, because again, we're exposed to stuff day in and day out. I went through a psychological exam when I joined the LAPD once. I never had anybody have a conversation with me for 20 years after that, and I had been exposed to some pretty gnarly stuff. And so it's important to do this ongoing to make sure that people are in a good headspace. And if you find an employee, any other corporation, if you have an employee who has a problem, most organizations have an employee assistance program where they get you help. Police departments don't do that. And so if you have an employee who needs help, get them that help. If you can't correct the problem, then clearly this is not the job for them. You would not allow me to work in a restaurant as a top chef if every night people were going home with Montezuma's Revenge. You'd get me out that kitchen.
Wow. And you want to know what? This idea that we have as the public that our police officers are going under a regular psych evaluation is a myth, because I certainly thought we were doing better than that. Sandra, you are up with your last question, dear.
So, how would you suggest that we get our community engaged, because like I say, most people think that the elections that matter are those on the federal level, not realizing that it's those on our local level that make a big impact in our day-to-day lives. So what suggestions would you have? Because a lot of times, I know here in the Atlanta metro area, a lot of times town hall meetings aren't really productive. There's a lot of bickering and then they shut them down. So everybody is out. So things happen behind closed doors and stuff. So, what are some suggestions you can give that we can do?
I'm not sure how you really go about educating a community that may or may not want to be educated. I mean, I do what I do. I say what I say. I had a podcast for a time. I was coming on every week with, highlighting things that had occurred and talking about a couple of things, what officers can do differently and what we as community can do differently, because we certainly have an affirmative responsibility to make sure that we do what police officers say so that we don't put ourselves in harm's way, so that we don't become the victim of what I call contempt of cop, which is you piss one of them off and there's a price to pay. And so there's a certain segment of society out there who just don't have time. This is not easy work. It's not anything that's going to happen and change overnight, because it didn't get this way overnight. And so I say, talk to the people who have an ear and an interest, and spread what you know with others who are activists in your community, and just try to spider out from there.
I'm going to say this. I'm not sure if there's already a book about the tactics on how to hold someone accountable, and then how the different structures connect together. But even that would help people, understand the importance of them taking a particular actions. How to hold the police accountable for dummies. I mean,
you know what? It's so funny.
Here you go.
Look, here you go, right here. You want to know what to do? Black and Blue, the creation of a social advocate. I wrote this book talking about first my experiences on LAPD, and then I revised it in 2018 because I first published it in 2013. 2014 was when Mike Brown and Ezell Ford and Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and all of that jumped off, right?
Okay, yeah.
So I revised it in 2018 to address those issues. How do we stay safe? What's that conversation that, Black mothers and fathers are having with their children? Women are having with their husbands, so that they come home at the end of an evening safely. I talk about that in my book. And I also talk about what you need to do, some of the things that I've shared with you today about holding officers accountable. What does it look like? What does accountability really look like? Because we hear people say officers need to be held accountable, but they don't articulate what that means.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what I'm saying. How does what does it look like? And then how do you go about getting that done? Dr. Lay, he is a true student and definitely a teacher. When he gets your book, I'm going to have him put together a PowerPoint.
Well, listen, anybody that wants to have me come out and speak, I like to talk. So I'm always amenable and available to come and speak to some of these town hall meetings, college campuses, talk to folks who want to hear. And the thing that saddens me most is, when there is an opportunity for these kinds of events, it's usually the elders that are there. It'd be nice if they would come and bring their grandchildren and their great grandchildren, because those are the ones that need to hear this.
I wonder, have you ever thought about doing like a Black and Blue for teenagers, like the teenage version of it?
Me personally?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, because Black and Blue, that that certainly does sound like more adult reading, but teenagers, they have a shorter attention span, and sometimes they just need it quick and dirty, so to speak. This is what it is. Draw those dots real close together so they can get it.
Well, I will say that Certainly, when I'm on national TV, I only have 7 minutes to say what it is
Yes,
I have to
yes,
say
yes.
about being safe. And so to that end, I have a YouTube channel. If anybody wants to go there, and Sergeant Dorsey Speaks is my YouTube channel.
Okay.
Sergeant SGT.com is my website. You can find information about what it is that I say that will keep you safe. I mean, we pretty much know this stuff, right? We tell our kids all the time. The bottom line is, when you leave your house, the goal, and for me too, I've got 4 sons. So I'm constantly having this conversation. When you leave your house, the goal is to get back home. And there's nothing wrong with, it don't make you no punk. Nobody's going to think less of you if you let an officer do whatever it is that they're going to do, because they're going to do it anyway. If they're going to stop you, if they're going to search your car, whether they got a reason to do it or not, they're going to do it. They'll do it, and they'll beat you up, and then they'll put you in the hospital and arrest you for assaulting them. So just let them do their thing. Let them do their thing. Be quiet, zip your mouth, be a good witness, and then let your family members, your parents, deal with whatever administrative process is available to you. But the goal is to get home at the end of that encounter. And that's what I talk about in my book, How to Survive a Police Encounter. Get home safely, and then work that other stuff out later. Don't try to hold court curbside with an officer. They'll put hands on you, and no good will come of it.
Absolutely. Now that's what not to do. That is what not to do. And I do want to put some last words out here, some disclaimers. Number one, honest and truly, I have been treated both like a princess and like a criminal by police, and my behavior did not change either time. It was what was in the police officer who that decided my value and how they were going to treat me. And this idea that it's not all police officers, you're right, it is not all police officers, but when a good police officer is quiet, when there is a bad police officer present, then that actually makes you a partner in crime. And so that is absolutely not okay. And this idea that police gangs are a misnomer, I don't know, some kind of fairy tale, that's very real. And I'm going to just go right ahead and say it. It's not just in LA. It's not at all just in LA. Cheryl, you are just a breath of fresh air. You give us so much knowledge. I know that when you're on TV, you normally only get 7 minutes to make your point, but you have given it to us today. But I got to tell you, we could probably sit with you another hour and a half or so, because listen, we only got halfway through your video. And I have a whole list of questions that I didn't get to ask, but I want to be respectful of your time. Did you have any last words that you wanted to give the audience? Go out and buy her book. Book her for personal appearances. That's my thought. What are your last words?
Yeah, I just really want to thank you for reaching out to me and having me come on and giving me an opportunity to speak my truth. And for anyone who has a need, a question, you can certainly reach out to me. I am available and accessible. You can email me. You can find me through my website, SGT, which is the abbreviation for Sergeant, SGT Cheryl Dorsey, or just put in CherylDorsey.com and that will take you to me as well. Again, my book, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate, is available on my website if you want a signed copy, or you could just go to Amazon and get a garden variety. And there is a wealth of information in there that I'm certain is going to resonate with whoever reads it.
Excellent. Cheryl, don't run off. I want to talk with you just for a few more minutes before we leave. But guys, I am going to have to end this program. We could be here all night because she is just brilliant. I am thankful for each one of you watching, and I can't tell you how important it is that I get to spend this time with you. But our time it has ended, so I'll simply say bye bye for now. You're winning. You're winning. You're winning.